complex ones. When I think of the word brand and when I think of what it means, I really go back to the origin of the word brand, which comes from the word firebrand. So firebrand actually is a burning piece of wood, and branding goes back to the art or to the practice where humans used to actually brand their cattle stock. So if you see the horse on the left, you see a number on that horse. And that was actually a way of identifying cattle stock for all humans long, long back. So for me, really, a brand is an identifier. It's what gives you a unique identity, and it's what sets you apart from the pack. So in a very simple term, that is a brand for me. Brands are, of course, virtual. They exist in the minds of our consumers and in the minds of anyone who experiences them. What is important is that brands exist in our minds as people. So when you're thinking of some of the iconic brands, you can think of personality traits. You can almost imagine how that brand would behave if it were a person. And therefore, our task as marketers becomes, bringing this person alive in the most vivid way for our consumers. The second question that I would answer or, probe at a little bit before getting into the branding processes, what makes a strong brand? So we are all surrounded by a lot of brands every day in our lives, but there's some that take an iconic status. So are there any themes that these strong brands share? So when I was thinking about this question, there were essentially four themes that I could think of. The first one being that all great brands are consumer-driven brands. All new launches for these brands, all new products, all new campaigns are not just signed off by internal stakeholders, but they are also signed off by their consumers. So they are tested, they are approved, and then only do they go to market. The second very important ingredient for a strong brand is a very clearly defined identity and positioning. So the key question around who am I and why by me is very, very clear for a very strong brand. The third thing that a strong brand delivers is the brand promise consistently, every time, all the time. So imagine Apple, when Apple talks about think differently, it's not a promise that they will live up to once, but it's a promise that they live up to in every product launch that they do. It's a promise that every person working at Apple lives and breathes every day. Similarly, if you think of an example of Indigo Airlines, and when Indigo had come up with on time as their brand promise, they had tailored all their SOPs around ensuring that they have an on-time delivery to their consumer. While they could have compromised on other areas of service, but on-time was an area that they were absolutely, absolutely committed to deliver, and therefore all the SOPs, all the trainings, all the people in Indigo were trained around this brand promise of on time. The fourth and very important factor that I have found in great brands is that they are constantly innovating and evolving. We know of enough brands that have vanished because they chose not to evolve. And therefore, keeping track of trends, keeping track of what's happening in the marketplace, and constantly innovating and evolving is the fourth very, very important theme that I saw for strong brands. So getting into the branding process now, the process that I'm talking about essentially keeps in mind these four themes. So the process is going to be consumer driven. The process leads to a very strong brand essence, which leads to a very clear positioning at the end of the process. The process is iterative, so it is something that can evolve over time. So looking at branding, when we think of great brands, we often think of great campaigns. We think of brands which have iconic logos. We think of great ads. But very often these great ads and these great outputs that come are the result of very, very well put together strategies. So therefore, the first thing that I would want to leave with you guys is that branding is about strategy first and then about creativity. So unless one has a very, very clearly defined business strategy linked to marketing strategy and therefore the brand strategy, it is not possible to deliver on the brand objectives and finally deliver value to the business. So the branding process essentially starts with very clearly defined brand objectives, wherein there are two layers of the objectives that one should be looking at. One is, what is my brand delivering to the business? So what is the intent of getting into the entire branding exercise? Is it market share? Do I want to take share from existing players in the market? Is it premium? So do I want to sell at a delta compared to competition? Or in some categories which may be new or which are niche, and if I'm a market leader, is my job growing the market? In many cases, the task of the brand could be a combination of these, but it is very, very important to understand what we're trying to do, because that leads to very, very different approaches in terms of branding. The second question to be answered is, what does the brand deliver to the consumer? So what is the unique selling proposition that I have for my consumer? Either something that truly differentiates me as a product, or something that I can at least be the first to claim, be the first to talk about. But what is that unique thing that I give to my consumer that no one else does? Once the objectives are set, I think the biggest and the most important step in the branding process is being able to look at deep insights. Inciting as a process, I cannot stress enough on, but I think it is the heart of the entire branding process. These insights often come from your consumers. Speaking to consumers, your most loyal consumers in your strongest markets can often lead to insights which are very, very powerful. Speaking to trade partners, speaking to people along the entire value chain, speaking to feet on the street, and trying to understand things that they've been observing. Many times these are unstated. So, for example, when you're talking to your consumers, not just listening to what they're saying, but also trying to observe behavior, which may be unstated, becomes very, very critical. In fact, I know of great marketing companies that have their brand managers spend a day with the consumer, so stay a day in the consumer's house and actually understand the life of the consumer. In our company, so I work with the textiles division of the Aditya Birla Group. In our company, all managers, whether production or design or sourcing or supply chain or marketing or sales or finance, every manager has to spend one day in the market a quarter and interact with the consumer customer directly to understand reasons why they're buying, not buying us. And this entire process that we started almost 2 years back has been extremely, extremely useful, not just in getting insights from the consumer, but also in changing mindset within the organization. Another thing that we do in our organization to gather insights is, as a fashion apparel player, we are very, very clear that our designs have to be in trend with the market. And therefore, we started doing consumer groups every month in our strongest markets with our loyalty customer base. So customers who buy us regularly are gold and platinum customers. We speak to them every month. We show them our latest designs and we try and take feedback from them. Some of the feedback and some of the learnings from these design groups have been invaluable, things that we could not have picked up from trend reports, that designers could not have picked up from forecasts, etc. And therefore, setting up a very, very robust insight process, something that may be relevant and right for your company, is extremely, extremely important in the branding journey. The insights that we get typically can be divided into 4 categories or 4 areas. The first one being insights around the category. And when we look at category insights, it's not just about looking at insights about what's happening in the category today, but more importantly, trying to pick up trends about what is likely to impact my business tomorrow. As an example, when Indra Nooyi was CEO of PepsiCo, she said that she'd observed this trend wherein she was seeing people moving away from fizz drinks to health juices, health drinks, water, etc. And she immediately knew that the product portfolio of PepsiCo needed to have a revamp. So it's insights like those, which are right in front of the eye, but can get missed if one is not really observing and listening, which become very, very critical. The second major area where insights need to be gathered is the consumer. So, of course, knowing who's my consumer today, but also understanding where will growth come from. So when we look at a consumer cohorts, which cohort will drive growth in the future and which cohort is likely to degrow. That again becomes critical in the way you will communicate your brand, in the way you will position the brand, where the brand will get sold from, etc. Also important to understand if there's any change in influencers in your category. So where is the consumer getting influenced from? Are there any changes there? Are there any new influencers that we need to tap as a brand? That becomes another very, very important thing to look at when one is looking at trends. The third piece is around competition, understanding, of course, direct and indirect competition, but also looking at competition that could be coming in from outside the category. Given the current era where startups are coming in, where technology is disrupting every day, this becomes very, very critical because today competition is really coming in from disruptors that one would not generally track. As an example, I often talk about, how as a watch player, who would have imagined that competition would come from, tech players? So today, Apple watches do more business year on year compared to any of the luxury Swiss watches, be it Omega, be it Cartier, etc. And therefore, for a watch player, the competition has actually come from a tech company. The fourth very important area where trends need to be looked at very, very closely is the channel. Typically we have a distribution channel that we follow, but of course, needless to say today, digital is a channel to look at very, very closely and see how that channel is shifting for your own category. The other interesting thing that is happening in channels today are collaborations and very interesting collaborations across channels. So for example, a paint company, Asian Paints, tying up with an urban company to deliver services to the consumer, or a grocery retailer tying up with a Dunzo or with a distribution company to ensure home deliveries in 30 minutes. So looking at such changes that are happening in the channel because of collaborations between two like-minded companies, again, becomes very, very important. So once the trends are in place, once the insights have come in, and you speaking to your consumers and you've gathered all the insights, they come together in what I call in a framework that in ABG is called the brand compass. But essentially, it is very close to the brand key. So the brand key essentially is a branding framework that was delivered by Unilever in 1999. And I've been lucky to learn the framework from one of the 14 people who had actually worked on it. So the brand key essentially brings together a single page framework, which then forms the basis for many, many things that one would do in marketing. It combines two very, very important elements. So the brand key looks at the external conditions in which the brand exists. And very importantly, the brand key is made from the consumer's view of the brand. So the brand key is not written basis the brand manager's view. It is written basis the consumer's view of the brand. So the brand key essentially has 8 elements, which I will run through. These are elements that we often talk about as marketers. But the beauty of the framework is that it brings it all together cogently and cohesively in a single framework. So the brand key begins with understanding and in articulating of the competitive environment. Again, when writing the competitive environment, ensuring that we are covering not just direct competition, but also indirect competition that may be coming in for the brand. The key question to answer while writing the competitive environment on the brand key is who wins when you lose and who loses when you win. So where will the share get exchanged? So who is going to be the gainer and who's going to be the loser when you win or lose respectively. The second part of the brand key is the target audience. So defining your TG very sharply and clearly. Here for many brands, there could be multiple consumer cohorts that one may be reaching out to, or one may be trying to onboard for the brand. What is important is to write the pen portrait of the consumer that is likely to give you the largest share of growth in the future. So this audience has to be the audience that is going to give the brand the maximum advantage in the coming years. The third piece, which is insights, which I have already delved into a little bit of detail in the previous slides. Again, in terms of insights, one may have a laundry list of insights that come through across the 4 C's that we spoke about. What is important is to pick the insights that will deliver the maximum competitive advantage to the brand. From there on, we move to the next 4 elements of the brand key, which are very closely linked to each other. The fourth element is around benefits. So what functional, emotional, or sensory benefit is the brand fulfilling for the consumer? So the consumer, for example, and these benefits, while functional benefits can work, but typically the emotional benefits work better. So for example, a Rolex watch has nothing to do with seeing time, right? It's more emotional. Similarly, for an Apple Watch, in fact, today categories like toothpaste and deos, etc., have also moved away from the functional and moved to the emotional. So typically, in terms of benefits, while you may list down the functional and the emotional benefits, speaking about the emotional benefits works better. The fifth part of the brand key is the value and the personality. In terms of values, again, there could be multiple values that a consumer thinks are valuable for a brand. What becomes critical is to test those values against a simple question, which is, what are the values that the brand will die to uphold? And then suddenly you'd find that that list becomes very, very small because there'll be very, very few things that the brand will really, really hold on to if one really puts it to this test. In the same part of the brand key, we also put in the personality of the brand. The personality of the brand is really the way the brand behaves. The personality of the brand needs to be written very, very carefully because that finally leads to multiple implications in terms of a go-to-market strategy, in terms of packaging, in terms of how the brand identity comes alive. And personality can lead to very, very distinct imagery of brands in the minds of consumer. A good example is the cola category. So if one were to think of a Coke versus a Pepsi versus a Thumbs Up versus a 7-Up versus a Sprite, they're very, very vivid and different imageries that would come to mind. And therefore, the personality again becomes extremely important to be written sharply and clearly. The sixth part of the brand key is the reason to believe. And the reason to believe goes hand in hand with the benefits that we're talking about for the brand. So if I have, for example, quality as a benefit, then an equivalent reason to believe. So why should a consumer believe that high quality is a benefit that this brand is providing? Is the reason to believe that should go in. Typically, heritage, expertise, scale. So number one brand, been in existence for the last 100 years, experts in a particular category. These are good reasons to believe to put in. Certifications and any sort of awards that the brand would have won, again, become good reasons to believe that can be put in. The seventh part of the brand key, which many believe is the most difficult part of the brand key to write, is the discriminator. So what is the point of difference of the brand? And the discriminator is written as, only this brand can deliver to me this advantage. So it is a sentence that will start with only brand ABC, only brand XYZ, and being able to articulate that in a simple sentence becomes very, very critical because that becomes the USP of the brand, that becomes the reason why a consumer will come and buy you. Finally, all of these 7 elements culminate into what we call the brand essence. A brand essence is essentially what the brand delivers in simple 2 to 3 words. For example, Dove Real Beauty. So that is the sense of the brand. Of course, that is the positioning of the brand, but would come in from in a sense that would be very, very close to that. Yeah. So this framework sort of then becomes a governing framework for many, many aspects of marketing, be it the positioning, be it the pricing, the identity, the packaging, or the points of sale. So multiple things that get governed by the brand key. So once the brand key is done, the brand key along with the business objectives and the brand objectives that have been put in place lead to what is called the creative brief. The creative brief is handed over to the creative agency. Obviously, very critical to have good creative agency partners on board. Not necessarily the biggest, but agencies that are willing to work with you on the brand in giving it the shape that you think will help you gain maximum in the marketplace. So the creative brief then leads to iterative creative rounds. You would have concepts which will get converted into animatics, rough films to the final film. Final film could itself go through rounds of edits, which finally is the ad campaign that you would take to market. What becomes critical in this entire process is testing at every stage. So test at every stage along the way to be sure that we've not deviated from the initial objectives that have been set out. So test the concept card, test the animatics, test the first film that comes in your hand. Very, very important that the consumer relays the same message that you want the film to deliver. So once you have the film in your hand, the final task, of course, is the campaign execution. And some of my learnings here is that money is never enough. So no matter how big or how small your budget is, it will never, never be enough. And therefore, prioritization becomes key. Which markets you want to go to, which consumers you want to go to, how many weeks on air do you want to be, how active do you want to be on digital becomes extremely, extremely critical. Also, I think brands are built over time in the minds of the consumer. So being top of mind over a period of time becomes very, very critical. And therefore, planning for sustenance over flashes of visibility works better. Today, with digital, one has the opportunity of going sharper, avoiding leakages, launching, learning, and quickly correcting. Therefore, look at digital very, very carefully in your media mix. Maybe look at digital first, which a lot of brands are doing. My plans are all digital first now. Finally, measure the benefit of the campaign. So what had you set out to do when you put in the objectives versus what is getting delivered through the campaign becomes very, very critical to measure. So having gone through this entire process from putting in the objectives to assimilating all the trends which are impacting the category, consumer, competition, channel, to getting into creation of the brand key, to getting into creative, and finally going to market. All of this is a continuous process, not to say that the brand key needs to be rehashed every quarter, but it is very, very important to keep listening to your consumers and being aware of what's happening in the category, looking out for any threats or opportunities, any disruptions that could impact your current positioning. And while I do not look at significant, changes happening very, very quickly on the brand, it's important to have consistency in what you're communicating to your consumer. It is equally important to keep rejuvenating your brand, and therefore incremental innovations on the brand become very, very critical. So that, in sum, is the branding process that I wanted to speak about. I know while there's a lot of creativity that comes into branding, but I also think it's a science, and if followed, methodically, it can lead to some great campaigns in the end. So, keeping in this process in mind, I'll talk about the brand that I manage today, which is Linen Club. For those of you who do not know Linen Club is India's largest linen brand. We are the only linen specialist brand in the country. We've been in existence for the last 70 years. But from a consumer perspective, we've been in the market for 20 years. We are into both fabric and apparel, and we are retailed through around 200 exclusive outlets and a huge number of multi-brand outlets across the country. So for us at Linen Club, we started the branding process as I described it sometime in 2016. And we began with a series of emotions. So the first emotion, which was around the category, some of our key learnings was that linen is a very, very small part of the category. So the apparel category in India in menswear space is dominated by cotton. And we saw that linen was a very, very small part of our consumers' wardrobe. Linen also was considered suitable only for limited occasions. So when we asked the consumers, when would you wear linen, they would typically say brunches or holidays or resort wear, occasions that don't necessarily come very, very frequently in an Indian consumer's life. Also, we heard these consumers who could have potentially bought into Linen Club tell us that linen is not for me today. It will be for me when I get to a certain stage in life, when I have a very relaxed lifestyle. So the category was being pegged higher than it was actually retailing at. So there was this constraint of limited occasions and for a select few that we heard our consumers relay back to us. Also, there were multiple barriers and myths that the consumer spoke about. So multiple barriers in terms of use and care of linen that we heard, and multiple myths around linen use and care again. Some true, some not true, but definitely leading to lesser usage of linen by these consumers. So, having looked at this entire category landscape, we figured that as leaders of the category, and as someone who had a lion's share in the category, it was very, very important for us to look at category expansion. And therefore, the objective very clearly defined for the brand was to look at category expansion through new user recruitment. So these users would have typically come in through a switch from cotton to linen. And while that switch happened, we obviously wanted the largest share of growth, therefore establishing the Linen Club advantage of why Linen Club over any other linen brand in the country. And the third important task for us in terms of category expansion was to actually address some of the barriers that were true to the category and therefore look at category innovations that could address some of the barriers. So essentially, there were two key tasks that we were looking at. One was communicating to the consumers the true benefits of linen and the Linen Club advantage. And the second was working with the new product development teams to come up with innovations that could actually help in onboarding new consumers onto the brand. So when we thought about the consumer that we wanted to bring in, we saw that fabric and linen in particular was being worn by a slightly older consumer. So our buying TG was 35 plus, but we wanted the brand to become relevant to a slightly younger consumer. And therefore, the entire messaging was to a 30 to 35-year-old male NCCSA. We wanted to understand if there were any commonalities that we saw in these consumers in terms of psychographics. And for that, we did a series of emotions with consumers, a series of individual interviews, groups, wardrobe audits, spending time with these consumers. And what we heard were very, very interesting stories from these consumers, many of who were self-made. Buying into linen because linen gave them a very distinct look and identity, got them a lot of appreciation. And they felt that that was sort of, recognition of where they'd reached in life from where they had started to where they'd reached. They had their stories of passion around the work that they were doing and how they'd started it and how they'd reached where they did. And we thought that was where we saw sort of a connect between this consumer and the brand Linen Club. So as India's leading linen brand, as a brand that had been working on linen for the last 70 years, as a brand that lives and breathes linen every day, we can truly claim that we are passionate about linen. Just like our consumers who were passionate about what they were doing in their lives. And that led to the brand positioning of Passionate Like You. And that was the campaign that we launched last year. So I'll just show you the campaign film and then get into the innovation piece. Hope that was visible. I think it got stuck at a couple of places, but I hope you were able to see it. Finally, the other area that I spoke about, which is about looking at innovations in the category. So one of the biggest barriers to linen today, and a barrier that's been there in the category for a while, has been that linen wrinkles. And therefore, it has a crushed look. And in India, typically, a crushed look is not really appreciated by the consumer. Uh, so, sort of limits the usage of linen in the formal space. So the biggest innovation that we've looked at for Linen Club has been Linen Club Uncrushable, which is essentially a wrinkle-resistant linen range that we've launched in the market. This, we believe, can lead to onboarding a lot of non-users who are not buying into linen because of the biggest barrier of the category, which is wrinkles. So I will leave you with a video that we've done for Linen Club Uncrushable. So the way to market for Linen Club Uncrushable has essentially been digital, and we've been doing this series of quirky videos talking about what Linen Club Uncrushable is. I have to keep going out to show you the videos. Yeah, so that's it from my end. Happy to take any questions from the audience now.
Thank you very much, Shruti. May I ask the participants, in case you have any questions, you can just raise your hand and we will then unmute you. Any questions from the participants? Shruti, there's a question from Mr. Narendra Grover. Are you using CRM for expanding your brand image?
Yes, we are. We run a fairly robust loyalty program for our exclusive outlets, wherein we register all the consumers who come into the store, and then we reach out to them time and again uh, to talk about various offers that we may be running at the store, to talk about our collections. And also, there are various parts of the loyalty program in terms of the benefits that our consumers can get.
Thank you. Any other questions from the participants?
Shruti, while others will ask the question, you may like to tell the team why we had to change our positioning and what is the background of changing the position from the earlier positioning, and what kind of research went into understanding why we needed to change the position.
Sure. Thank you for that, boss. The positioning of Linen Club in around 2013-14 was around Live the Linen Life, where we had Rohit Bal, who'd actually been working with us on the linen category over the last decade. So from 2005-6 to 2013, Rohit Bal had worked with us as a designer who was really, really passionate about linen. So he became also the face of the brand in the process, and Live the Linen line, Live the Linen Life was the positioning that we took for the brand Linen Club. What we were trying to showcase at that time to the user was, the life that one could have when one was wearing linen, with all the beautiful colors, with all the comfort and the style that that fabric gives. In some ways, that campaign was also something that was, replicated by the category. So other brands who did campaigns at that time around linen also stuck to a very similar zone, where we had individuals who had really, really arrived in life, who had a larger than life sort of lifestyle, donning various linen ensembles. So when we spoke to our consumers in 2016, we heard a lot of them say that linen is not for me. Linen is for my boss. Linen is for me 20 years down the line. Linen is for a relaxed lifestyle that I don't have. So we realized that by putting in this luxurious look to linen and this luxurious lifestyle association with linen, we had actually alienated a huge chunk of the consumer base that could actually buy into the category. And therefore, we felt the need of becoming more relevant to a larger user base. So making the brand younger, but also making the brand more accessible, and therefore opening up the category. That is how we moved from Live the Linen Life to a positioning which was made for the different. Essentially, the idea was that linen is a very, very different fabric. In fact, if we look at the world of fabrics, there's linen and then there's cotton, wherein cotton can be equated to the alpha male, while linen can be equated to the beta. So there's something different about the fabric. There's something different about the person who wears linen. And that's how the campaign Made for the Different came into being, where we were trying to bring in the properties of linen to the forefront, of linen being comfortable, it being relevant to multiple occasions, it being truly, truly different, and for those who are different. We ran that campaign for a couple of years, basis various consumer researches that we did during this time. What we heard the consumers tell us is that we understand why linen is different, but why should I be buying into Linen Club? So I understand I should be buying linen because of all the properties that you're talking about, but why Linen Club? And that is when we made this move, going from Made for the Different to Passionate Like You, because passionate about linen is something that only Linen Club can own as the only specialist linen brand in the country. That's been the journey from Live the Linen Life to Made for the Difference to Passionate Like You. At every stage in the process, when we've made the shift, we've ensured that there's a lot of consumer immersion and research that's going in to ensure that the objectives that we've set out at that stage for the brand get fulfilled.
You may also like to tell how the selection of the brand ambassador for Made for the Different was so carefully crafted, because Farhan Akhtar, who ran the campaign for us, was uniquely and distinctly a very different kind of person. So how every element of the campaign needs to come together to send a very credible message of what you're trying to convey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in fact, when we moved from Live the Linen Life to Made for the Different, we were very sure that the brand needed, to break the clutter and to be really, really visible. And that is why we first chose to go with the celebrity route. So the first decision was whether to go with the celebrity or not go with the celebrity. So we decided to go with the celebrity route because we were sort of coming in on air after a fairly long hiatus, and we needed to sort of get noticed. And then came the important decision of how to choose the celebrity and who would work for a positioning like Made for the Different and the Beta Man. We evaluated multiple options within sports personalities, within film personalities. And, then we heard that Farhan sort of fit very, very beautifully to Farhan Akhtar, who was the ambassador for the brand, while we ran Made for the Different as the positioning. He fit in very, very beautifully with this entire ideology of different and fit in with many other facets of linen. So, for example, we talk about linen being versatile. When one thinks of celebrity who's truly versatile, Farhan came to mind because he was a singer, a director, an actor. So he was really doing multiple things in life, and he had chosen his own paths to success. So he had chosen a very different path to success. Started off as an assistant, then went on to be a director, storyteller, then an actor. So while he was successful, he was really the beta man and not the alpha. We also felt that by bringing in Farhan at that time, we were sort of using all that he stood for to bring out all that linen could stand for. So that sort of worked very well in terms of a match. And then when we moved from Made for the Different to Passionate Like You, what we were trying to do with Passionate Like You was talk about stories of real people who are passionate and about different passions that our consumers may have. So one could be passionate about business that they're running, so passionate about success, passionate about fitness, passionate about music, passionate about anything in their lives. And we felt that to bring that story alive, we needed to have real people instead of having a celebrity face. And that's when we moved away from a celebrity and took 4 different individuals in our campaign. So the campaign that I showed to you had 4 different individuals with 4 different passions. So that's how that journey of getting a celebrity board and then moving away from a celebrity came into being. So very rightly, like Thomas has said, very important that once the brand key is put in place, looking at all elements of the key and then looking at how that will come to life in terms of and the campaign that one finally delivers.
There's a question from Dr. Manish Arya on ethics and brand. How is it correlated and how is it considered taken into consideration?
I think ethics generally in business is very, very critical, and so is it in the case of a brand. In fact, today with digital, the kind of evaluation that the brand goes through and the kind of communication that happens on digital, which can go viral in seconds. It is absolutely, absolutely critical for brands to be setting in the right promises and delivering on them. So really ethics and brands is, has to be there. I mean, otherwise you cannot exist in the marketplace today. One can look at short-term gains, but if one is looking at building a sustainable brand that can stand the test of time, one has to do business ethically.
Thanks. There's a question from Mr. Tanmay there. I'm just unmuting you, Mr. Tanmay. You can ask the question directly. Yeah, Mr. Tanmay, you can ask the question.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Shruti ma'am, very good afternoon, and it was a very nice presentation. So I come from an academic background. So I just wanted to know this repositioning activity which you carried out. In fact, I have two questions, but I go by the second one first. Repositioning activity which you carried out. How do you evaluate this repositioning has worked for you? By what time did it start working? When you changed and tried to bring in a new TG with the positioning elements?
There were various business KPIs that we put in place when we were going in with the entire rebranding exercise. To give you an example, we had put in KPIs around the number of new stores that we would be opening. So as we have exclusive stores, our store network is run by franchisees. So being able to onboard a new set of franchisees and opening up new stores. We have KPIs in terms of the loyalty customer base that we want to grow and increase. And the new customers that we want to onboard, again, gets measured at our retail stores. We have KPIs against the like-to-like growth that we are looking at for the duration that we run the campaigns in the markets that we run the campaigns. So for example, Passionate Like You got launched during the festive season last year in South and West, which are our critical markets. So looking at what is the like-to-like growth delivery that happened in those markets at that point of time. So, just an example of some of the business KPIs. Along with this, because the campaign was digital first, we had digital KPIs in place in terms of the hits that we were expecting into our website, in terms of the kind of impressions and the views that the campaign got on digital, which is really the equivalent of the GRPs or the reach and frequency that one does on TV. So those were the marketing KPIs. So having very, very clearly defined KPIs and then being able to measure those. I think for a campaign, especially when launched in the festive season, which is the peak season, we looked at the sales improvement that we got immediately post the campaign. So we did a pre-post 3 months after the campaign, and that is where results showed. So I think once you have clear objectives put in, it becomes easier to look at how the campaign has delivered post the repositioning.
Thank you. Avinash, can I go ahead with my second question? Or if someone is there, I can take it away.
Yeah, someone is have already asked another question.
Sure.
So
thank you.
Ask Ruchir Walia to ask the question. Yeah, Ruchir Walia, you can ask the question. You have unmuted you. Please, Ruchir Walia asked, what is the role that your employees, especially the ones with lesser grade skills, have played in your branding?
Sorry, the ones with lesser
grade skills have played in your branding?
I think it works both ways actually. When one is doing the entire branding process, one has to ensure that the voices of employees are directly in touch with the market and the consumer gets heard. So that is the input into the branding process. But more importantly, every employee in some ways is, the brand ambassador. So when they go out to the market, when they're interacting with the channel partners, when they're speaking to the consumers, how they talk about the brand and how they bring to life the brand positioning becomes very, very critical. So therefore, whenever I launch a campaign, I do an internal launch first. Like I test the campaign with my consumers, I also test the campaign with my sales team, with my design team, and get their reactions on what they're thinking about the campaign. Because they might have to own the brand as much as I do as the brand manager. In fact, even more, because they're interacting with the market every day. So I think very, very critical.
So thanks a lot. Now we have come to the end of this session, and thank you very much for your very informative presentation and responding to the queries of the participants. May I now request Mr. Basudev Mukherjee, Assistant Secretary General, SOGM, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. You'll have to pardon me for not switching on the video because of connectivity issues at this end. But I would like to propose the vote of thanks for the session. It's been a very interesting and a thought-provoking session. We've learned a lot about the Aditya Birla's Group journey in terms of branding, especially in terms of the Linen Club. And I'm sure our participants have taken away a lot from it. I would like to thank Ms. Shruti Agarwal and Mr. Thomas Verghese for joining us today. We look forward to the next edition of this series, which will be coming up soon. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tuva.
Thank you. Thank you, Vasudev. Thank you, Shruti, and thank you, Avinash, and thanks to all the participants who've been on this call. I think more than Linen Club, I think it was a masterclass about the branding key and branding architecture, which a lot of the people who are on the call can take back as to what are the process steps for actually launching a brand, and how do you ensure a very seamless process, and also to ensure that every element, all stakeholders are part and parcel of this journey. Thank you. Thank you, Shruti, for a very brilliant presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.